side are you on? Which side are you on?
Tell me.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? We'll fight against Doge. We'll fight Elon Musk. No Elon scab within our walls. We'll fight from dawn to dusk. Oh, which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Well, I see things are going well for leftists. Oh my goodness. It's been an eventful past 2 weeks. Welcome back to the Brittany Hughes Show. I do apologize, by the way, for missing last week's episode. I was supposed to be here, but a couple weeks ago, I took a much needed vacation with my family. We had a great time. It was wonderful. We brought back a handful of souvenirs, one of which happened to be the flu. So that was no fun. Kind of took me out of commission last week. I'm doing much better now, so are the rest of my family. So thank you for your prayers, but glad to be back here just in time to deal with all of this insanity, apparently. So this was a group of protesters in Washington, D.C. this week who are like all kinds of mad that Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Trump's cabinet members that are quickly getting confirmed through the Senate and, you know, Doge and all of these people that have come in and have replaced the Biden administration. And they're now trying to weed out government waste and abuse. What a thing to be mad about. This is hysterical. The left-wing meltdowns over the past couple of weeks over the very notion that somebody, somewhere, after just decades and decades and decades of the government spending our money on some of the dumbest stuff imaginable, and the idea that somebody might want to get a handle on all of the waste that is constantly being pumped out of our federal system, what a thing to be upset about. Of all the things on the earth planet to lose your mind over, the fact that somebody might actually want your money to be spent in the most expedient and efficient way possible and not be wasted on dumb crap. I mean, I imagine there must be a certain kind of blissful freedom in being this stupid. I don't know. To just be completely unburdened by intelligence or common sense or logic or the ability to see just how stupid you look. I almost envy it, I would say, except that I'm not a total moron, nor do I have any desire to be. But it's amazing, is it not? Is it amazing that the thing that apparently triggers unhinged leftists the most, the thing that just sends them plummeting over the edge of just complete full-on idiocy, where they shriek like banshees and form drum circles like, you know, Woodstock rejects, the thing that lands them there is simply the idea that a non-governmental group, people like Elon Musk, who are not financially benefiting from any of this, right, is going through federal agencies and these bloated bureaucracies that we have had that have just ballooned into the stratosphere over decades of government mismanagement. And they're digging out millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, probably soon to be billions of dollars, of fraud, waste, and abuse of our money. That's what leftists are mad about. Butchering babies? Fine. Endless wars? Fine. Millions of illegal aliens busting into the country and costing us billions of dollars and killing college students and starting gang turf wars, all of that perfectly fine. No problem with leftists whatsoever. Nothing to see here. But the minute somebody goes, oh, by the by, here's like $100 million we spent on a box of paper clips we didn't need, leftists lose whatever passes for their minds because they are such indoctrinated little Autobots who have spent decades saturating and drowning in government Kool-Aid. This was a pastor in Tennessee earlier this week who actually stood at the pulpit of his church. It's a black church, by the way, in case you couldn't guess that, based on the fact that he went on this tirade, and he's probably going to get away with it because 501c3 rules against, getting political don't apply to black churches, apparently. Democrats literally hold campaign stops at black churches and pass out voter pamphlets, and that's totally fine. So it probably should not surprise us that this pastor, Dr. Steve Caudle, who is the lead pastor at Greater Second Missionary Baptist Church in Chattanooga, Tennessee, openly called for people to, quote, get violent and fight against Elon Musk and Doge. Here's that clip.
And I will say to you, beloved, no one likes violence, but sometimes violence is necessary. When Elon Musk forces his way into the United States Treasury and threatens to steal your personal information and your Social Security check, there is the possibility of violence. Sometimes the devil will act so ugly that you have no other choice but to get violent and fight. Well, someone might say, now, Reverend, you shouldn't be talking about violence. This isn't the Christian thing to do. Well, I will say, why not talk this way? Because Jesus did.
That's interesting. Did he though? Did Jesus Christ really encourage people to get violent over political reasons? Did he? Chapter and verse, if you please, because I seem to recall Jesus Christ actively discouraging his disciples actually from engaging in violence, even as he himself was being hauled off to the cross. In fact, of all the things that Jesus Christ ever patently condemned in Scripture, cracking down on government waste is nowhere to be found. I don't remember that in the Sermon on the Mount, do you? Interesting. I've read the Bible cover to cover. Nowhere does Jesus tell the disciples to start, swinging a sword because Caesar decided to cut government entitlement spending. There's no verse in the Gospels that's like, cast thine blade toward thy governor, for he hath cut thine Medicare payments. Thus saith the Lord. I don't recall that. This is some serious twisting of the Scripture. It's dangerous, by the way. It's dangerous to do this. But this is what you have when you have political pastors that use their pulpit to spew a political message, particularly one that openly encourages violence. You know what Christ does talk about in the Scriptures, by the way, if we really want to go there, if we really want to talk about what does Jesus Christ say in the Bible? Keeping the commandments given by God to Moses, for one, which include a mandate against murdering, which is exactly what abortion is and results in the death of millions of innocent children every single year across the globe, many of them funded by tax dollars. Christ repeatedly affirmed God's binary design for humanity as men and women who were created with a purpose for a unique sex-specific role. Christ repeatedly told his followers to turn from their sinful ways and pick up their cross and follow him, even if it means rejecting cultural norms and societal vices, none of which do I see leftists doing, by the way. If we want to talk about things that, Christ approved of and things that he condemned, I'm pretty sure that murdering infants and looting stores and letting criminals openly invade communities and stealing people's hardworking, tax dollars to spend it on castrating gender-confused children, none of those would have made the green light list under Jesus Christ. Let me know when you preach a sermon on that one, brother. Crazy is it not? The things that send liberals into an absolute tizzy when literally every other day on the calendar year, they are rubber stamping some of the most heinous, vile, offensive, nonsensical garbage one can possibly come up with in your imagination. You idiots have no problem handing porn to kindergartners. You have no problem parading naked men in bondage gear down a street in front of children and letting a dude beat the absolute snot out of some woman in a boxing ring because he thinks that he's a chick. But Donald Trump says that we're going to chop some wasteful spending and save some of your money, and that's what gives you a coronary? Really? Your priorities are wildly skewed. Either that or you are so brainwashed by the system that has convinced you that you are incapable of running your own life and need some elite overpaid bureaucrat somewhere in some marble building to do it for you. Which is just, quite frankly, sad. By the way, nobody's talking about taking away anybody's social security checks just in case your TV got stuck on CNN this week and you lost the remote and maybe you found yourself wondering if any of that was true. Nobody is talking about stopping social security checks for people who are getting them. They should be stopped, frankly. That godforsaken government highway robbery scheme needs to die, a very painful death, unfortunately. But that's a whole other discussion as to exactly how and when and how to do all of that. that without completely ripping the rug out from underneath people who have paid into the system all these years and now depend on it. But that's not even what we're talking about right now. That's not even what's happening right now. What's happening right now is that Elon Musk and Doge are digging through government entitlement spending like Medicare and Social Security and, all of these other federal agencies that are just chock full of our cash and are spending it willy-nilly and nobody's keeping track of where it's going. And they're basically trying to run audits to find fraud. Significant fraud, and determine how much taxpayer cash is being wasted in payments to people who should not be getting this money. This is not a new phenomenon, by the way. According to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, the Social Security Administration estimates that all improper Social Security payments, including payments to dead people, are estimated at about $3 billion per year. $3 billion in inappropriate, improper Social Security payments every single year. You pay for that. That's your money being wasted. And nobody's trying to get a handle on that. From fiscal year 2015 through 2022, the Social Security Administration estimates it made nearly $72 billion in improper payments. That's according to the Social Security Administration's Inspector General. And that's just Social Security, by the way. That's not Medicare, that's not Medicaid, that's not WIC or SNAP or unemployment benefits or any of the other government entitlements, which is a terrible word, by the way. You're not entitled to other people's money. You're not entitled to crap other than what you work for. But all of these government entitlements, all of these programs that we have, this is just one single program. $72 billion in improper payments between 2015 and 2022 alone. It doesn't touch things like the billions in fraudulent COVID payments that the federal government was just shooting out of a potato cannon back in 2020, like some bizarre episode of Oprah's Favorite Things. We'll probably never know the true scope of how much taxpayer cash was fraudulently wasted during that year of collective insanity. Nobody is talking about taking away people's Social Security checks. What we're talking about is making sure that Social Security payments aren't being made to people who don't have Social Security numbers or who might not be in this country legally or, I don't know, who are dead and should have been taken off the rolls. But these entitlements and the promise of government handouts and a federal safety net, those are the things that make up the very foundation of Democrats' entire political strategy. Their campaigns, their ability to hold on to power, literally rests on your dependence on the government, which is why exposing fraud, waste, and abuse is such a massive threat to them. Because it undermines the ability of the federal government to run a system this massive and this bloated, which of course it can't, at least not effectively. That's the whole point. It pulls the proverbial mask off of the system that we have been told to just trust. Because all of these people are so much better at running your life than you could ever possibly be. FEMA, another fantastic example of government waste and a completely unnecessary agency that causes far more problems than it solves. Not because, responding to people experiencing the effects of disasters is a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. But it becomes a bad thing when the response is so costly, so blundering, so ineffective that it defeats the very purpose of what it's there for. This kind of response is much better done at state and local levels, where state and local people understand the scope of what they're facing and what they need. And if the federal government needs to provide some, financial assistance in that effort, then so be it. But the idea that we have an entire agency full of overpaid employees who basically come in and do nothing but get in the way and suck up resources by their very existence that should be going to the people who've actually been affected by this stuff. That's all the federal government ever does. And now we have multi-billion-dollar agencies like FEMA that have so much cash, they're dumping it into things like housing illegal aliens rather than doing their job, which is helping Americans impacted by things like floods and fires. So by the end of Joe Biden's term, which ended less than a month ago, there were still thousands of displaced people in North Carolina and across Appalachia who were still waiting on their aid requests to be processed after Hurricane Helene wiped out their entire town. I mean, whole communities just reduced to sticks, washed 20 miles up a river that didn't used to be there. And it was FEMA's job, or at least it was supposed to be, to make sure that these people had what they needed to survive in the aftermath of that completely unprecedented disaster and to start rebuilding their lives, which, I don't think anybody thought was going to happen overnight. But these are people who lost everything in a storm that they could never have seen coming. Hurricanes do not typically hit Appalachia. They were completely unprepared. But rather than doing its job and helping displaced people and making sure that these areas had what they needed to start getting back on their feet, here's the story that we got instead. Hundreds of families in North Carolina were displaced by this hurricane and were staying in FEMA shelters because they literally did not have a home to go back to. Hundreds of these families, there were thousands of them in total, but almost 1,000, over 700 of these families were told in late January, in the middle of the winter, that they had to leave their FEMA-funded hotels or motels because they no longer met the criteria to stay there. Most of them didn't meet the criteria, reportedly, because FEMA said an inspector had called 3 times and had yet to receive a response. So you got to be by your phone to prove that you don't have a house anymore. And all these people who were deemed no longer eligible for FEMA housing, they were given 3 weeks to find other arrangements. 3 weeks. You've got no house. You've got no livelihood. Your entire neighborhood has been destroyed, but you can't stay here anymore. You've got 3 weeks to get out. So this, by the way, the deadline for temporary housing was originally set for January 11th. So that's what you get, right? Your whole rural community gets washed away in a hurricane and your home is gone and your town is gone and your mountain community now looks like a swamp. And you get a few months in a FEMA motel and then you get an eviction notice. Don't have to go home because you don't have one to go home to, but you can't stay here. So this deadline in January started coming up and multiple local news reports started sounding the alarm that all these people in these shelters were going to get booted out and it would wind up leaving about 2,000 to 3,500 families, not people, families, multiple people in each one of these families. So we're talking about thousands of people, including children, homeless in the middle of a snowstorm that was expected to hit. So what did FEMA do? Well, they announced a 24-hour deadline extension. Yay! Gonna get walloped by a blizzard and you don't have a house thanks to a hurricane? Bummer. Here's an extra day to figure it out. That's how FEMA treats Americans. That's how things are going down in North Carolina for actual tax-paying Americans in some of the most rural and economically challenged areas of the country. You get a $750 check in the onset to help you survive after your house gets totally destroyed by a hurricane you could have never seen coming, and then FEMA ignores your house if you happen to have a Trump sign anywhere within the vicinity, and then you get booted out of your motel after a few months because the federal government has decided that you've had enough help and you are now on your own. Meanwhile, FEMA, same agency, right? The one whose entire existence is supposedly to provide emergency disaster aid to Americans and residents, is shucking out millions upon millions of dollars to illegal alien border crossers in high-end luxury hotels in New York City. This was a fun one this week, in case you missed it. The Department of Homeland Security has reportedly fired 4 employees in connection with a report that broke on Monday, revealing that the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, spent nearly $60 million on fancy hotel digs for illegal aliens in New York City last week alone. 1 week. So Elon Musk, and this is why the left absolutely cannot stand this man, because he uses his massive platform to expose crap like this, which many of us have been screaming about for years, but has gone completely ignored by the powers that be that benefit from this system. Musk tweeted late night in a late night post on Sunday, Doge had found FEMA funneled a whopping $59 million to luxury hotels in the Big Apple to house illegal alien border crossers last week alone. $59 million. This is unreal. This is what happens when a multi-trillion-dollar federal government chock full of overpaid, power-tripping bureaucrats and a whole bunch of cash that they have forcibly taken from us at the threat of prison time, and all of these bureaucrats and all of these politicians who have spent decades never having to answer for the cash that they spend because they've got so much of it and nobody ever checks to see where it's going until now. You can be an American citizen in rural North Carolina living in a Super 8 because your home is gone, and apparently 3 months isn't enough time to just go and find a new one with all of the money that you don't have. And the federal government decides that's fine. You can just go live under an overpass or something while you figure it out. But if you're an illegal alien who crosses into this country in open violation of our immigration law, and you just plant yourself and say you're here to stay because you want to, you get a taxpayer-funded plane ticket and an extended stay in the Regency, a block over from Broadway, and you get 3 square meals a day, which you then complain about because you don't like the food, and the city kicks out local school children from community centers so that you can have access to the pool, and then if you decide to go assault some people or rob a store or join Tren de Aragua, no big deal, because even if you get caught, you're going to be released and nobody really cares if you show up to your court hearing. We got a massive double standard going on. Insane. Absolutely insane. And it's not new. It's not new. Just like it's not new that USAID, which is now being dismantled under the Trump administration and relegated to the trash heap where it belongs. This is not new information that USAID was spending millions and millions and millions of taxpayer dollars on total crap. This has been known for a long time. What hasn't existed for a long time is a president who's actually willing to deal with it. This is what USAID spent last year, just a few of many things, by the way. This is in no way an exhaustive list. According to the White House, $1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbian workplaces. $70,000 for production of a DEI musical in Ireland. $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. Can somebody please find where in the world in the United States Constitution it says American taxpayers should be funding at the point of a federal gun comic books and musicals about queer gender benders in South America? Hint in case you don't want to spend your time on it, it doesn't. There is no reason whatsoever for Americans to be spending money on this crap. And not just because we've got Americans who currently can't afford to buy a home, who are struggling to put groceries on the table and fill up their gas tanks. I don't care if every single American was wealthy and doing great and owned 6 homes. There is no reason why your hardworking cash should be spent on this garbage, this left-wing pet project nonsense. And the list of this stuff goes on and on. We haven't even scratched the surface. This is not new. MRC-TV and I have reported on government waste on some of the most idiotic stuff you could imagine now for years, decades even. We've got politicians like Rand Paul who submit yearly lists of insane stuff the federal government has spent our money on. Citizens Against Government Waste publishes an annual pig book that details literally billions of dollars in wasteful spending. Here's just a few examples from last year's book. By the way, these are pet projects from Republicans and Democrats. That's the thing here. This is not a specific to one party or the other. This is a top-down, government-wide problem. $190,000 for a shark repellent study at the Moat Marine Laboratory in Sarasota, Florida. That one was pushed by Congressman Greg Steube. He's a Republican. $8.8 million to fund fish passages and fish screens. I don't even know what that means. That's by Senators Catherine Cortez Masto and Jackie Rosen, both Democrats from Nevada. Nearly $18 million for improvements to the Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum in Abilene, Kansas. That one's by Jerry Moran, a Republican. $500,000 for the restoration of a historic gymnasium in Madison, Mississippi. That one's by Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, a Republican. $30 million for 24 earmarks by 28 members of Congress to fund bike paths across 13 states. $30 million for bike paths. $4 million for 2 theater restorations, including the Iola Theater in Kansas, which states on its website that it's funded, quote, entirely by private contributions, but which then received millions in taxpayer funding for improvements so that it could host, quote, community gatherings and weddings. This is what your money's going to. Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, senators from New York, got $1.75 million for the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, despite the fact that the Met held assets of over $5 billion in 2023. So they're flush with cash already, but for some reason they needed another $1.75 million in federal taxpayer funding. By the way, all of that's back scratching for politicians' campaigns. That's all that is. They get money appropriated for pet projects, and then people in the city turn around, all the officials in the city that wanted that stuff funded, turn around and help run re-election campaigns, and the cycle continues over and over again. This is nothing but a giant back-scratching scheme. I mean, the waste is unbelievable. Lisa Murkowski, Republican from Alaska, got $4 million for the Alaska King Crab Enhancement Project. Whatever the crap that is. And around and around and around we go. Also this week, if you missed it, Elon Musk called out the fact that apparently we've got a mine shaft, an actual honest-to-God mine shaft in Pennsylvania that we use as a federal hub where thousands of taxpayer-funded employees process federal retirement applications by hand on paper. You can't make this stuff up. It's an abandoned, repurposed mine shaft. It's called Iron Mountain. You can Google it. It's literally an old mine, a cave in the side of a mountain in Butler County, Pennsylvania, where federal employees have to process other federal employees' retirement applications. And they've got to be processed on paper and manually walked over to a file, and it takes like months to do this. Because for some reason, we can put a man on the moon back in the 60s, but we can't figure out how to file federal retirement applications in any way other than carting paper around a mine shaft? Here was Elon Musk explaining this insanity in his own words.
The most number of people that could retire possibly in a month is 10,000. We're like, well, why is that? Well, because all the retirement paperwork is manual on paper. It's manually calculated, then written down on a piece of paper. Then it goes down a mine. And I'm like, what do you mean a mine? Like, yeah, there's a limestone mine where we store all the retirement paperwork. And you look at a picture of this mine. We'll post some pictures afterwards. And this mine looks like something out of the 50s because it was started in 1955. So it looks like it's like a time warp. And then the speed, then the limiting factor is the speed at which the mine shaft elevator can move determines how many people can retire from the federal government. And the elevator breaks down sometimes, and then nobody can retire.
Oh my Lord, y'all, we have a Gringotts in the United States. I would be shocked if we didn't have trolls down there shuffling around, cardboard boxes filled with file folders. I'm imagining those pump carts, like in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. We've got Dopey down there stamping retirement applications with like a credit card swipe machine from 1992. This is my favorite, by the way. This is my favorite because the leftist media can't actually refute any of this stuff. It's been hilarious watching them bend over backwards the last few weeks because they can't actually say that this stuff isn't true. They have to try to find discrepancies or try to make it sound like, well, okay, that's an actual problem and that is true, but it's not as bad as they're making it out to be. And watching them twist themselves into pretzels trying to defend this nonsense would be hilarious if it weren't so sad because we're talking about billions of dollars of our money while American families literally struggle to buy groceries. Okay. All of this stuff is actually as insane as it sounds, but the media can't say that. A, because they don't actually want to shrink the government. That's reason number one. They're in bed with all of these left-wing nut jobs who want to control your life and tell you what to think and what you have to believe. They don't want you to understand things and to know the truth. They want to claim that they are the arbiters of the truth, right? As Mika Brzezinski famously admitted, that's our job to tell you what to think. And B, the media also don't like the fact that the more this stuff is exposed and the more Americans are clued in to just how horribly their hard-earned cash has been wasted while they were trying to figure out how to fill up their gas tanks and, I don't know, maybe have a prayer of putting a kid through college, the more obvious it is that the media have been absolutely failing or rather deliberately neglecting to do their jobs. Here's all the garbage that the federal government has been doing and all that's been going on right under your nose with your money, and the fourth estate, which is supposed to expose all of this stuff and speak truth to power, they've been too busy chasing around imaginary Russians and bleeding out all over illegal aliens at the border to tell you how your cash is being spent. And now they look like even bigger idiots because it's taking Elon Musk and a social media platform to shine a light on this nonsense. Because we don't have journalism anymore to do it. Journalism is dead. So this is what the media do. This is my favorite part. Here's how CBS News actually tried to spin this whole Iron Mountain story, like it's not as stupid as it actually is. Multiple employees with the Office of Personnel Management who wished to remain anonymous, I bet they did, told the Butler Eagle that Musk's comments are inaccurate, stating that the facility doesn't have an elevator and that the process of retirement paperwork for federal employees varies on a case-by-case basis. Wow, really splitting hairs to try to call Musk a liar here, aren't we? It doesn't have an elevator. I mean, everything else is kind of true, and yeah, we shuffle around retirement applications in cardboard boxes in manila file folders in an abandoned mine shaft, but Musk said we have an elevator, and we totally don't. Liar. We have to huff boxes of manila folders full of paper applications up and down the stairs in an abandoned mine shaft on our own two bleeding feet, damn it. Forget a computer, we don't even have an elevator down here. We have to move stuff up and down on ropes and pulleys. Don't take that away from us like it makes it any better. Sounds to me like Elon Musk was actually trying to do you a favor and assume that you at least had an elevator down in your hobbit hole. What, would that disturb the orcs? Geez, this is the kind of crap we're talking about. It's not new, but at least we have someone in office finally who gives a crap. Who is willing to at least start holding people accountable for this madness. And we've got all kinds of liberal politicians and activist judges desperately trying to get in the way. Because they have all benefited for years from this system just chugging along. Completely trampling American taxpayers. And they don't want that system threatened because they are the beneficiaries of it. You and your family be damned. I mean, leftist politicians are all kinds of mad about this. Take special note, by the way, of the people who are blowing their tops because there's a group of people going through government agencies, some of which I didn't even know existed, by the way, and I do this for a living. We have an agency for freaking everything. It is impossible to get your mind around the scope of the size of the federal government at this point and how bloated and inefficient and wasteful it has become. Take special note of the people who are awfully threatened by the idea of somebody going through the books and, pulling out all the ways that the government has been spending our cash to the tune of billions and even trillions of dollars over the years and exposing that so that the people who are paying for all of it can be aware. These are politicians who have spent years, some of them decades, in Congress with basically an open checkbook to just pump endless funding into this bureaucratic maze and all of their pet projects and all of the crap that they've decided that we needed, because God knows we can't chop down a tree in this country without 57 permits and 108 unelected overpaid bureaucrats signing off on it. I mean, you want to know why the cost of everything from a gallon of milk to a house is through the roof and you can't afford any of it? The regulatory structure in this nation is absolutely beyond imagination. And we have to deal with an endless number of agencies and departments and offices and administrators to deal with all of it. I mean, the simple truth is that Donald Trump and Elon Musk and the millions of Americans who voted for exactly what's happening right now, the left wants you to think that all of these people have buyer's remorse. I haven't seen buyer's remorse. This is exactly what the American people voted for. This is exactly what Donald Trump campaigned on. This is exactly what he said he was going to put Elon Musk and Doge in charge of doing. These are exactly the people that he said he was going to nominate to his cabinet to start weeding out some of this nonsense. This was crystal clear from the beginning. And this is exactly what tens of millions of Americans voted for in November. There's no buyer's remorse here. Just because leftist politicians don't like it doesn't mean that this is not exactly what people wanted. The simple truth that we all understand is that we don't need all these people. We don't need a government nearly this big. The only reason for a government this big is because the powers that be within it want to control every aspect of your life, because in doing so they get rich and you become helpless and dependent on them. And what's ironic in all of this is that the very things that the government shouldn't be involved in and shouldn't be spending our money on are the things that Democrats will defend to their death. But the relative few things that the federal government is actually in charge of and should be doing are the exact things that Democrats don't want to do, like deporting criminal aliens back to, whatever slime pit they crawled out of. I mean, Democrats are upset that Trump is rounding up illegal aliens with criminal convictions. We haven't even gotten to illegal aliens who are just living here illegally and otherwise haven't committed a crime. Living here illegally, by the way, is a crime, and it makes you a criminal, and you are a criminal for doing so. But we're not even talking about people who otherwise are not particularly, violent or dangerous or whatever. We're talking about people with criminal convictions living in the United States, many of whom have been released back onto the streets multiple times by sanctuary cities. And Democrats are mad that Trump is booting them back to, Venezuela or wherever, and he's opening up Gitmo as a detention center to house all of the rapists and the murderers and the gangbangers and the drug dealers and people with 7 DUIs on their record, but California doesn't care because we're going to hang homeless North Carolinians out to dry, but God forbid we kick illegal alien criminals out of our country. It is backwards land and nothing makes sense. Pay very close attention to the people who are far more upset that Donald Trump is trying to get a better handle on how the government spends your money that it forcibly takes from you than they are about the fact that Joe Biden spent the last 4 years openly letting millions upon millions of dependent people, including criminals, into this country to suck up resources and live off of your dime while turning your community into little Guadalajara. The lines have been drawn very distinctly here. This is not hard to figure out. One hand, we have a president and the people he's putting in place in various cabinet positions or Doge or whatever, who are listening to the voice of the American people, who are sick and tired of watching their money being dumped overseas or funneled to illegal aliens or wasted on, drag queen story hours in Nicaragua or pumped down a mine shaft or the zillions of other places where it's practically lit on fire by geriatric congressmen who are trying to win their 42nd election. And on the other hand, you have rich, elite, power-hungry politicians who are more blasé when a twice-arrested illegal alien border jumper murders a college student in cold blood while she is out for a jog than they are when the federal government spends hundreds of millions of dollars on a pier in Gaza that lasts 3 weeks and kills 2 American military members. or that shucks out hundreds of millions more to museums and opera houses and bike paths while you can't afford to buy a home thanks to taxes and government red tape. It is not hard to figure this one out. Choose your fighter. And with that, that's the Brittany Hughes Show for today. Thank you so much. Barring another medical episode, I should be back here next week. I hope you'll join me next Thursday. In the meantime, head over to Apple Podcasts, hit the subscribe button on the Brittany Hughes Show. That way you won't ever miss an episode. You can also subscribe to the Newsbusters podcast with Tim Graham on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Got a lot to load up your phone with as you're going down the road to work or dropping the kids off to school or whatever you might be doing. I hope you have a fantastic weekend and a blessed week ahead. I'll see you back here next week.